The morning fog hung heavy over Buckingham Palace as Catherine walked through the grand corridors, her footsteps echoing against the marble floors. Something felt different today, though she couldn't quite place what it was. The usual bustle of palace staff seemed more urgent, their whispered conversations stopping abruptly whenever she passed by, her personal secretary. Margaret appeared at her side with an unusually serious expression. "Your Royal Highness, His Majesty requests your immediate presence in the private study," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Catherine noticed Margaret's hands trembling slightly as she clutched a sealed envelope. The walk to the king's study felt longer than usual. Catherine's mind raced through possibilities, but nothing could have prepared her for what awaited behind those heavy oak doors. King Charles sat behind his massive mahogany desk, looking older than she had ever seen him. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his usually perfect posture had given way to a weary slump. "Please sit down, Catherine," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. His voice carried a weight she had never heard before. The room felt suffocating, filled with intention that made her heart race. She could hear the distant chiming of Big Ben, marking another hour in what was about to become the most important day of her life. As she settled into the chair, King Charles reached for a document that lay before him. The royal seal was clearly visible, and Catherine noticed his signature at the bottom, still wet with ink. "What I'm about to tell you will change everything," he began, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her stomach drop. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the ticking of the antique clock on the mantelpiece. Catherine found herself gripping the armrests of her chair, preparing for words that would reshape not only her future, but the future of the entire monarchy. She thought of William, probably at home with the children, completely unaware that their world was about to be turned upside down. King Charles cleared his throat and leaned forward. "Due to circumstances that have recently come to light, I am making an unprecedented decision regarding the succession," he said slowly, each word carefully chosen. "The traditional line of succession is about to change in a way that hasn't happened in over 1,000 years. Catherine's breath caught in her throat. She knew the weight of royal tradition, the centuries of protocol that governed every aspect of their lives. The very foundation of the monarchy rested on the predictable transfer of power from one generation to the next. What could possibly warrant such a dramatic departure from established law? Outside the study windows, she could see tourists gathering for the changing of the guard, completely unaware that history was being written just yards away from where they stood. Their cameras flashed as they captured what they thought was just another ordinary day at the palace. If only they knew that the very nature of what they were photographing was about to change forever. "Catherine," the king continued, his voice growing stronger with determination, "I need you to understand that what I'm about to ask of you goes beyond duty. It requires courage, strength, and a willingness to face opposition from quarters you might not expect." His fingers drummed against the desk, a nervous habit she had noticed during their most serious conversations. The document before him seemed aglow with importance, its official seals and elaborate calligraphy representing centuries of royal authority. Catherine realized that whatever was written on that paper would not only affect her, but would send shockwaves through the Commonwealth, Parliament, and royal families around the world. The media would explode with speculation, historians would debate, and millions of people would have their understanding of the monarchy fundamentally altered. As King Charles reached for the document, Catherine noticed something else on his desk that made her blood run cold. A second envelope, this one bearing Camilla's name in elegant script, sat unopened beside several legal documents. The implications began to dawn on her, though the full picture remained frustratingly unclear. Whatever was happening, it involved not just the succession, but the very heart of the royal family itself. The revelation hit Catherine like a physical blow. King Charles had just informed her that he was abdicating, but not in favor of William as everyone expected. Instead, he was invoking an ancient royal prerogative that would allow him to name his successor directly, bypassing the traditional line of succession entirely. The room seemed to spin as the implications sank in. "You want me to become queen?" Catherine whispered, her voice barely audible. The words felt foreign on her tongue, impossible to believe. She had always known that one day she would be queen consort, supporting William as he ruled, but this was something entirely different. This was absolute power, absolute responsibility. Thrust upon her without warning or preparation, King Charles nodded gravely. The monarchy needs fresh leadership, someone who understands the modern world while respecting our traditions. William is an excellent man, but he lacks the political instincts necessary for what's coming. You, however, have shown remarkable judgment in every crisis we've faced. His praise felt hollow against the magnitude of what he was suggesting through the tall windows. Catherine could see the palace gardens where she had walked countless times with her children, explaining the history of each statue and fountain. Those peaceful moments seemed like a lifetime ago. Now those same gardens would become her responsibility, along with every inch of the realm and all the lives that depended on the crown's decisions. What about Camilla? Catherine asked, though she dreaded the answer. The queen consort had always been cordial to her, but Catherine wasn't naive about the complex dynamics within the royal family. Camilla had waited decades to claim her place beside Charles, enduring public scrutiny and criticism that would have broken most people. How would she react to being cast aside just as suddenly as she had been elevated? A shadow crossed King Charles's face. That brings me to the most difficult part of this conversation, he said, reaching for the envelope bearing Camilla's name. There have been developments that make her continued role as queen consort impossible. I cannot go into details at this moment, but I assure you that this decision, while painful, is absolutely necessary for the survival of the monarchy. The cryptic response sent chills down Catherine's spine. She knew Camilla well enough to understand that the woman was fiercely protective of her position and would not surrender it easily. Whatever these mysterious developments were, they must be serious enough to warrant such drastic action. Catherine's mind raced through possibilities, each more troubling than the last. When do you plan to make this announcement? Catherine asked, trying to maintain her composure while her world crumbled and rebuilt itself around her. She thought of her children, of how their lives would change overnight. They would go from being third in line to the throne to being the children of the reigning monarch. The weight of that responsibility felt crushing. Tomorrow morning, King Charles replied, causing Catherine's heart to stop. I know this seems rushed, but circumstances require immediate action. By noon tomorrow, you will be Queen Catherine, and the entire world will be watching to see how you handle the transition. The casual way he spoke about such a momentous change made it seem even more surreal. Catherine stood abruptly, needing to pace to process what she was hearing. The study suddenly felt like a prison, its rich tapestries and priceless artwork closing in around her. She walked to the window and stared out at the city beyond the palace walls. Millions of people went about their daily lives, completely unaware that their constitutional monarchy was about to undergo its most dramatic transformation in centuries. What about William? She asked, turning back to face the king. How is he going to react when he learns that his wife will rule instead of him? The question hung in the air like a sword, sharp and dangerous. She knew her husband well enough to predict that his reaction would be complex. Mixing pride with confusion and perhaps even resentment, King Charles's expression softened slightly. William is stronger than you think, and he loves you more than his own ambition. He'll understand that this is what's best for the country, even if it's difficult for him personally. The reassurance felt hollow, and Catherine suspected that the king was trying to convince himself as much as her. The grandfather clock in the corner chimed the hour, its deep notes reverberating through the tension-filled room. Each chime seemed to count down to the moment when Catherine's old life would end and her new one would begin. She realized that once she walked out of the study, she would never again be simply Catherine, Princess of Wales. From this moment forward, every decision she made would carry the weight of the crown. Sarah took a deep breath and made her decision. Specialist Adams was dying on the table in front of her, and regardless of the consequences for her own situation, she couldn't let that happen. She pushed aside all thoughts of her compromised cover and focused entirely on the patient. I need specialized extraction tools, she said to the surgical nurse. The standard instruments won't work with these fragments. Do we have microsurgical forceps and electromagnetic detection equipment? The nurse looked confused. Electromagnetic detection? Doctor, we don't typically use that equipment for surgery. Lieutenant Colonel Chun stepped forward. I'll have the equipment brought in immediately. It's available on base for specialized operations. As they waited for the equipment, Sarah continued her examination of specialist atoms. The fragments were embedded in a pattern that confirmed her worst suspicions. These were from an advanced explosive device designed to cause maximum internal damage while leaving minimal external evidence. Dr. Martinez, Chun said quietly, moving closer so only she could hear. How long were you embedded with Task Force Nightingale in Syria? Sarah didn't look up from her patient. 14 months, she answered simply. There was no point in denying it now. And how many cases like this did you handle? 43, Sarah replied immediately. These devices were being field tested by hostile forces. Our team was tasked with understanding their effects and developing countermeasures. Chun nodded grimly. That's why you were specifically requested. Specialist atoms encountered the same weapon system. The fragments are designed to be nearly impossible to extract using conventional techniques. The specialized equipment arrived within minutes, wheeled in by technicians who clearly had security clearances far above the typical base personnel. Sarah immediately began using the electromagnetic detection device to map the precise location of each fragment within the patient's body. Interesting, she murmured, as the scan revealed the full extent of the injuries. The fragments are arranged in a specific pattern. This wasn't a random explosion. The device was designed to cause precisely this type of damage. Can you extract them? Chun asked. Yes, but it will require techniques that aren't in any standard medical textbook, Sarah replied, her hands already moving with practiced precision. The fragments are magnetized and designed to shift position if handled incorrectly. One wrong move could cause catastrophic internal bleeding. As Sarah worked, she became aware of a commotion outside the trauma bay. Through the window, she could see Colonel Harrison in heated discussion with several other officers who had apparently arrived while she was focused on the patient. She could see his gesture toward the trauma bay and his obvious agitation. Dr. Martinez, Chun said, following her gaze. Colonel Harrison is understandably upset about the security breach. He wasn't briefed on your background because your assignment here was part of a classified operation. What kind of operation? Sarah asked, using the specialized forceps to carefully extract the first fragment. The same weapons that injured you in Syria have been showing up in this region, Chun explained. Intelligence suggests they're being supplied to hostile forces by the same source. Your experience makes you valuable for both treating injuries and identifying the weapon system. Sarah paused in her work, a piece of the puzzle suddenly falling into place. You're saying I wasn't assigned here randomly? This was planned? Your humanitarian cover was necessary to get you into position without attracting attention, Chun confirmed. Unfortunately, your surgical skills made it obvious to Colonel Harrison that your background wasn't what it appeared to be. The second fragment came free, and Sarah immediately began working on the third. How many people knew the truth about my assignment? Very few, Chun replied. The operation was compartmentalized. Colonel Harrison's suspicions were actually a complication we hadn't anticipated. Through the window, Sarah could see that Harrison had been joined by what appeared to be senior intelligence officers. Their body language suggested a heated discussion about her presence on the base. Lieutenant Colonel, Sarah said as she extracted the fourth fragment, what happens after I finish treating this patient? Colonel Harrison has every right to be angry about being kept in the dark. Chun was quiet for a moment. That depends partly on how this mission develops and partly on whether Colonel Harrison can accept the classified nature of your assignment. The final fragment was the most dangerous one, lodged near Specialist Adam's heart. Sarah used the electromagnetic scanner to verify its exact position, then began the delicate process of extraction. The room was completely silent except for the steady beeping of the heart monitor. Got it, Sarah announced as the last fragment came free. Immediately, she began working to repair the internal damage and control bleeding. The patient's vital signs had remained stable throughout the procedure, and Sarah felt confident that Specialist Adams would recover. "Excellent work, Doctor," Chun said with obvious relief. "You probably saved her life." Sarah began closing the surgical site, but her mind was already focused on what would happen next. "Lieutenant Colonel, I need to know how much I can tell Colonel Harrison. He deserves an explanation, and I can't continue working here effectively if he doesn't trust me." "I understand your position," Chung replied. "Let me make some calls to headquarters. The situation has changed now that your cover has been compromised." As Sarah finished the surgery and began post-operative procedures, she could see Colonel Harrison still in discussion with the other officers outside. His expression suggested that he was receiving information that was both surprising and frustrating. "Dr. Martinez," Specialist Adams whispered weakly from the operating table. Sarah was surprised to realize the patient was conscious. "Don't try to talk," Sarah said gently. "You're going to be fine, but you need to rest." "Thank you," Adams managed to say. "I heard what you did, those fragments. I know it wasn't easy." Sarah looked down at the young soldier with a mixture of professional satisfaction and personal regret. She had saved Adam's life, but in doing so, she had revealed secrets that would change everything about her assignment and her relationship with Colonel Harrison. The trauma bay door opened, and Colonel Harrison entered with a stern expression. Behind him were two officers Sarah didn't recognize, both wearing the insignia of military intelligence. "Dr. Martinez," Harrison said formally, "when you're finished here, I need to see you in my office immediately. It seems we have a great deal more to discuss than I originally realized." Colonel Harrison's office was spartanly decorated, with only a few military commendations on the walls and a photograph of his family on the desk. Sarah sat across from him, feeling the tension in the room as he reviewed a thick folder that she assumed contained her personnel file. "Dr. Martinez," Harrison began, setting the folder down but keeping it open. "I've been in the military for 28 years. I've worked with hundreds of medical personnel, and I can usually tell within a few hours what kind of experience someone really has." Sarah remained silent, unsure where this conversation was heading, but certain it wouldn't be comfortable. "Your performance last night was exceptional," Harrison continued. "Too exceptional for someone who claims to have only humanitarian experience. The way you handled that shrapnel extraction, your immediate assessment of blast injuries, your complete lack of hesitation under pressure, these aren't skills you develop working in civilian hospitals or even typical humanitarian missions." He leaned forward, his gray eyes studying her intently. "I've seen soldiers who've been in combat for months still struggle with the type of injuries you handled effortlessly. So, I'm going to ask you one more time. What aren't you telling me about your background?" Sarah felt cornered. She had hoped her skills wouldn't be quite so obvious, but she should have known better. Combat medicine was a specialized field, and experienced military officers like Harrison could recognize it immediately. "Colonel, I've been completely honest about my qualifications and training," she said carefully. "My surgical experience is extensive, and I've worked in many challenging environments." "Challenging environments," Harrison repeated slowly. "That's an interesting way to put it. Tell me about Syria." The specific question caught Sarah off guard. "What would you like to know?" "Everything. Which organizations did you work with? Which hospitals? What were the dates of your service?" Harrison pulled out a pen, ready to take notes. "Because I've made some calls, Dr. Martinez, and there are some interesting gaps in your story." Sarah's heart began to race, but she kept her expression neutral. "I worked with several organizations over a period of 18 months. The security situation made it difficult to maintain consistent records." "Security situation," Harrison nodded. "Yes, I imagine it would be difficult to maintain records when you're working in an active war zone, especially when that war zone happens to be in an area controlled by hostile forces." The implication in his voice was clear. Sarah realized that Harrison suspected much more than just incomplete paperwork. His questions were becoming increasingly pointed. and she could see the analytical mind of a career military officer working to piece together information. Dr. Martinez. Let me be very direct with you, Harrison said, closing the folder. I've been doing some research since you arrived. Your surgical techniques, your reactions to combat stress, your knowledge of military protocols, everything points to someone who has extensive experience in war zones. Real war zones, not just humanitarian missions. Sarah felt the walls closing in around her. She had known this moment might come eventually, but she had hoped to prove herself before having to explain her complicated past. Furthermore, Harrison continued, your paperwork is almost too perfect. It's complete, well-documented, and answers every question except the most important ones. In my experience, when someone's background is that carefully constructed, they're usually hiding something significant. I'm not sure what you're implying. Colonel, Sarah said. Though she knew exactly what he was thinking, Harrison stood and walked to the window. Looking out at the busy base? I'm not implying anything, Doctor. I'm stating facts. Your skills are too advanced, your composure too practiced, and your knowledge too specific for someone with your claimed background. He turned back to face her. Here's what I think happened. I think you've been in combat zones much more extensively than you've admitted. I think you've worked in situations that weren't officially sanctioned by any recognized humanitarian organization. And I think you're here under credentials that don't tell the whole story. Sarah felt a bead of sweat roll down her back despite the air conditioning in the office. Harrison was getting uncomfortably close to the truth, and she wasn't sure how to respond without revealing things that could jeopardize not just her position here, but potentially much more. Colonel, I understand your concerns, she said slowly, but I can assure you that I'm fully qualified to serve in this position. My surgical skills and experience are genuine, regardless of where they were acquired. Regardless of where they were acquired, Harrison repeated. That's an interesting phrase. It suggests you don't want to discuss where they were acquired. A knock on the office door interrupted the tense conversation. Come in, Harrison called. Chief Medic Rodriguez entered, looking somewhat uncomfortable about interrupting. Sorry to disturb you, Colonel, but we just received word that Dr. Martinez is being requested for a special consultation. What kind of consultation? Harrison asked, his suspicion clearly growing. There's a soldier being transferred here from a classified mission, Rodriguez explained. The injuries are unusual. The medical team specifically requested someone with Dr. Martinez's expertise. Harrison's eyes narrowed. And how exactly would they know about Dr. Martinez's specific expertise? She's only been here 2 days. Rodriguez looked uncertain. I'm not sure, sir. The request came directly from command headquarters. They said she had the exact qualifications needed for this particular case. Sarah felt her stomach drop. A request from headquarters for her specific expertise could only mean one thing. Someone knew more about her background than she had revealed, and that knowledge was now becoming public. What kind of injuries? Harrison asked, his voice taking on the sharp tone of a commanding officer who sensed he wasn't getting the full truth. I'm not authorized to discuss the details, sir, Rodriguez replied. The case is classified. I was just told to inform Dr. Martinez that she's needed immediately. Harrison stared at Sarah for a long moment. Classified medical cases require specific security clearances. Dr. Martinez, clearances that take months to process and verify. Yet somehow you're being specifically requested for a classified consultation after being on base for only 2 days. Sarah realized that her carefully constructed cover story was beginning to unravel. The web of half-truths and omissions that had gotten her this assignment was now becoming a liability. Harrison was too experienced and too observant to be fooled much longer. I think it's time for complete honesty, Doctor, Harrison said quietly. Because whatever you're hiding, it's about to become very public. And if I find out you've been lying to me about your background, there will be serious consequences. The classified patient arrived 30 minutes later in a heavily guarded convoy. Sarah watched from the medical facility window as armored vehicles surrounded a specialized medical transport unit. Military personnel with high security clearances formed a protective perimeter around the ambulance. Colonel. Harrison stood beside her, his jaw tense with obvious frustration. This is highly irregular. Dr. Martinez, classified patients are usually handled by military physicians with appropriate clearances. The fact that you're being specifically requested raises serious questions. Sarah remained silent, knowing that anything she said now would only deepen Harrison's suspicions. She watched as the medical team carefully transferred the patient from the transport vehicle. Even from a distance, she could see the severity of the injuries. "Dr. Martinez," a voice called from behind them. They turned to see Major Phillips, the base intelligence officer, approaching with a serious expression. "You're needed in Trauma Bay 3 immediately. This case requires your specific expertise." "What specific expertise?" Harrison demanded before Sarah could respond. "Major Phillips, I need to know what's going on here. Dr. Martinez has been on my base for less than 3 days, and now she's being requested for classified medical cases?" Major Phillips looked uncomfortable, glancing between Harrison and Sarah. "Colonel, I understand your concerns, but this situation is above my clearance level. I was simply instructed to ensure that Dr. Martinez provides medical care for this patient. Above your clearance level?" Harrison's voice rose slightly. "Major, you handle intelligence for this entire sector. What kind of medical case requires clearance above your level?" Before Phillips could answer, another officer approached Lieutenant Colonel Chun, who Sarah hadn't seen before. His uniform indicated special operations, and his demeanor suggested he was accustomed to dealing with highly sensitive situations. "Colonel Harrison," Chun said formally, "I need to speak with Dr. Martinez privately. This concerns operational security matters that I cannot discuss in an open forum." Harrison stepped closer to Chun, his authority as base commander clear in his posture. "Lieutenant Colonel, with respect, Dr. Martinez is under my command while she's on this base. If there are security concerns about her background, I need to be informed." Chun's expression remained neutral, but Sarah could see the tension building between the two officers. "Colonel, I understand your position, but my orders come directly from Division Command. This matter involves classified operations that are compartmentalized beyond base-level security." "Compartmentalized operations?" Harrison's suspicion was now openly displayed. "Are you telling me that Dr. Martinez is involved in classified operations that I, as base commander, am not authorized to know about?" The confrontation was interrupted by Chief Medic Rodriguez hurrying toward them. "Dr. Martinez, we need you in Trauma Bay 3 immediately. The patient is critical and losing blood rapidly." Sarah realized she had no choice but to go. Whatever the consequences of her hidden background, a patient's life was at stake. "I'll be there in just a moment," she told Rodriguez, then turned to Harrison. "Colonel, I understand your concerns, but right now there's someone who needs medical attention." "This conversation isn't over, Doctor," Harrison said firmly. "When you're finished with this patient, I want answers. Complete answers." Sarah nodded and hurried toward the trauma bay, but she could feel the weight of multiple stairs following her. The situation was spiraling beyond her control, and she knew that her time for maintaining secrecy was running out. In Trauma Bay 3. She found a patient who immediately explained why her specific skills had been requested. The injured soldier was a young woman, probably in her early 20s, with extensive blast injuries that showed a pattern Sarah recognized immediately. These weren't typical IED injuries. They were from a much more sophisticated explosive device. "What do we know about the patient?" Sarah asked as she began her examination. "Specialist Adams," the field medic reported. "Part of a classified reconnaissance mission. Caught in an explosion approximately 6 hours ago. She's lost a significant amount of blood, and there appear to be unusual fragments embedded in her torso." Sarah could see immediately that the fragments weren't standard shrapnel. The metallic pieces embedded in the patient's chest and abdomen had characteristics she had seen before, but only in very specific circumstances. Her heart sank as she realized why she had been specifically requested. "Dr. Martinez," Lieutenant Colonel Chun appeared beside her, speaking quietly. "The fragments in this patient are from experimental explosive devices. Your experience with similar cases in Syria makes you uniquely qualified to handle this situation. Sarah's hands paused for a moment in her examination. Chun knew about Syria, not just that she had been there, but specific details about what she had encountered. This meant her cover was more compromised than she had realized. "I'm not sure what you mean," she said carefully, continuing her work on the patient. "Doctor, we don't have time for pretense," Chun replied firmly. "Specialist Adams was injured by the same type of device you encountered during your time with Task Force Nightingale. The fragments require specialized extraction techniques that only someone with your background would know." The room fell silent except for the beeping of medical equipment. Sarah felt every eye in the trauma bay focused on her. The mention of Task Force Nightingale was like a bomb going off in the room. It was a classified special operations unit that officially didn't exist. "I think there's been some mistake," Sarah said weakly. But she could hear the lack of conviction in her own voice. "Dr. Martinez," Chung continued, his voice carrying the authority of someone who clearly knew much more than he was revealing, "your work with Task Force Nightingale in Syria involved treating injuries from experimental weapons. This patient has injuries from the same weapon system. We need that expertise now." Sarah realized that her carefully maintained cover story had completely collapsed. Everyone in the trauma bay now knew that she had been involved in classified military operations, despite her claims of only humanitarian work. She could feel the shocked stares of the medical staff around her through the window of the trauma bay. She could see Colonel Harrison watching the scene unfold. Even from a distance, she could see the anger and betrayal on his face as he realized the extent to which she had been deceiving him. "Doctor," Chun said quietly, "the patient's life depends on your expertise. We can discuss the security implications later, but right now, Specialist Adams needs the skills you developed during your classified service." Sarah looked down at the injured soldier on the table, then back at Chun. She knew that her secret was now completely exposed. But she also knew that she was the only person in this facility who could save this young woman's life. Colonel Harrison's office was crowded with people Sarah had never seen before. 2 intelligence officers sat across from Harrison's desk, while Lieutenant Colonel Chun stood near the window. The atmosphere was tense, and Sarah could feel the weight of multiple stares as she entered. "Dr. Martinez, please sit down," Harrison said, his tone formal and controlled. She could see that he was struggling to contain his anger about being kept uninformed about her real background. "Colonel, before we begin," Sarah said, "I want you to know that I never intended to deceive you personally. I was following orders regarding operational security." Harrison's expression didn't soften. "Dr. Martinez, I've been briefed on your actual background over the past hour. I now understand that you served with a classified medical unit attached to Special Operations Forces in Syria. I also understand that your assignment to my base was part of an ongoing intelligence operation that I was deliberately kept uninformed about." One of the intelligence officers, a stern woman in her 40s, spoke up. "Colonel Harrison, Dr. Martinez's cover was necessary to protect an ongoing investigation into weapons trafficking in this region. Her medical expertise was needed, but her intelligence value required operational security." "Intelligence value?" Harrison looked directly at Sarah. "So you're not just a surgeon. You're also an intelligence asset." Sarah felt cornered but knew she had to be honest now. "During my time in Syria, I encountered weapons and injuries that provided valuable intelligence about enemy capabilities. That experience made me useful for both medical and intelligence purposes." "And you've been gathering intelligence since you arrived here?" Harrison asked. "No," Sarah replied firmly. "My primary mission was medical support. The intelligence component was secondary and only activated if specific situations arose." Harrison leaned back in his chair, processing this information. "Like Specialist Adams and her injuries from the same weapons you encountered in Syria?" "Exactly," Chun confirmed. "Dr. Martinez's ability to treat those specific injuries and identify the weapons characteristics makes her uniquely valuable for this operation." The second intelligence officer, a younger man with intense eyes, opened a folder and pulled out several photographs. "Dr. Martinez, during your treatment of Specialist Adams, Were you able to confirm that the fragments came from the same weapon system you encountered in Syria? Sarah nodded. Yes, the characteristics are identical. The magnetation pattern, the fragmentation design, and the internal damage profile all match exactly. This confirms our intelligence about weapons trafficking between Syria and Afghanistan, the female officer said. The same source is supplying both regions. Harrison looked frustrated. So while I've been running a military base, thinking I had a straightforward medical officer under my command, I actually had an intelligence operative conducting classified investigations. Colonel, Sarah said quietly, I understand your anger. But I was a medical officer first. Everything I've done here has been focused on providing the best possible medical care. The intelligence aspects were completely secondary. Secondary until today, Harrison pointed out, when your real background became necessary to save Specialist Adams' life. Sarah felt a moment of uncertainty about what to say next. The conversation was heading toward a revelation she had been dreading, but she knew it was inevitable now. Actually, Colonel, she said slowly, there's something else you need to know about my background. Something that explains why I was selected for both the medical and intelligence aspects of this mission. The room fell silent, and Sarah could feel everyone's attention focused entirely on her. During my final mission in Syria with Task Force Nightingale, our medical facility was attacked, she continued. I was caught in an explosion from the same type of device that injured Specialist Adams today. She paused, gathering courage for what she had to say next. I survived, but I carry physical evidence of my experience with these weapons. Evidence that Colonel Harrison has been questioning since I arrived. Harrison leaned forward, his expression changing from anger to confusion. What kind of physical evidence? Sarah stood up slowly and began rolling up the long sleeves of her uniform shirt. The reason I was so confident treating Specialist Adams is because I know exactly what these weapons do to the human body. I know because I've experienced it myself. As she rolled up her sleeves, her arms revealed an extensive network of scars. But these weren't ordinary surgical scars or accident marks. They were clearly from shrapnel wounds, multiple small, precise scars and patterns that exactly matched the injury she had just treated. The room was completely silent as everyone stared at the evidence of her personal experience with the weapons they had been discussing. My God, Harrison whispered, his anger replaced by shock. You were injured by the same devices. Not just injured, Sarah said quietly. I nearly died. I spent 3 months in a classified medical facility while they extracted fragments that were identical to the ones I just removed from Specialist Adams. The scars on my arms are just the visible ones. She rolled up her sleeves further, revealing more scarring that extended up to her shoulders. This is why I knew exactly how to handle today's surgery. I've lived through the effects of these weapons personally. June stepped forward. Dr. Martinez's personal experience, combined with her medical training, makes her uniquely qualified to both treat these injuries and provide intelligence about the weapon's capabilities. Harrison stood and walked around his desk, studying the scars on Sarah's arms more closely. These are from the exact same type of fragmentation pattern as Specialist Adams' injuries. Yes, Sarah confirmed. The electromagnetic signature, the way they resist extraction, the internal damage patterns, I know all of this because I experienced it myself. The female intelligence officer spoke up. This personal experience is why Dr. Martinez was selected for this assignment. Her combination of medical expertise and first-hand knowledge of these weapons is unprecedented. Harrison looked directly at Sarah, his expression now showing a mixture of respect and concern rather than suspicion. Dr. Martinez, why didn't you explain this from the beginning? This changes everything about how I understand your qualifications. Because explaining it would have required revealing classified information about my service in Syria, Sarah replied. And because most people react differently when they know you've been seriously injured in combat, I wanted to be judged on my medical skills, not on sympathy for my personal experience. Harrison nodded slowly, understanding beginning to replace his earlier anger. So when I questioned your expertise and background, you couldn't defend yourself without revealing classified information. Exactly, Sarah said. I had to let you doubt my qualifications rather than compromise operational security. The room was quiet for a long moment as Harrison processed everything he had learned. Finally, he looked at Sarah with a completely different expression than he had shown since her arrival. Dr. Martinez, he said formally, I owe you an apology. I questioned your competence and your honesty when you were actually operating under constraints I didn't understand. Your performance since arriving here, both medical and personal, has been exemplary. Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. Thank you, Colonel. I hope we can work together effectively now that everything is in the open. Harrison extended his hand to her. Doctor, it would be an honor to have someone with your experience and dedication serving at this base. I just wish I had known the truth from the beginning. As they shook hands, Sarah realized that her hidden past, revealed through the scars she had tried to conceal, had finally brought her the respect and trust she had been seeking all along.